Oh, I keep forgetting my microphone. Hang on. Sitting on it. There we go. Welcome to an evening of tea with Tyson. Don't worry about Mr. Tyson, he's just loading the dishwasher. Because, that's how we roll at 9:30 at night. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure where you guys left off because you read with Mrs. Kirchberg, but I'm going to start where I think she may have left off. I don't know. The three of them sat under a large tree with soldiers standing guard nearby and the villagers watching with interest from a polite distance. With his wife acting as an interpreter, Vasek explained that he had been a prominent writer before the Nazi invasion, but he had left his home in the city to join Mihailovich's forces in the mountains. He was serving as a political counselor to Mihailovich himself. Vasek was warm and cordial, explaining to Feldman that Mihailovich would do everything in his power to protect the downed airmen. Feldman expressed his gratitude and related that the villagers had been very kind to him already. The local people felt honored in his presence. Vasek explained because they considered American airmen to be brave warriors who were risking their lives to help them beat back the German invaders. And for most of them, Feldman was the first of these heroic flyers that they had ever seen. The colonel went on to explain how he and the others had retreated into the mountains after Yugoslavia fell to the Germans in 1941, following Mihailovich, who had been Minister of Defense under King Peter II. Though the guerrilla forces were poorly armed, they were determined to fight the Nazis with whatever they had. Feldman was inspired by Vasek's demeanor and look of determination in his eyes when he spoke of beating back the German occupiers. As they wound up their discussion, Vasek's wife explained that there was one more thing the colonel needed to tell Feldman. Our soldiers found 10 parachutes, she said, translating Vasek's quietly spoken words. Feldman knew he was talking about the crash of his own plane and that there had been 11 crew members aboard that day. The usual 10 plus a photographer on a special assignment. The Germans reached the plane first, and the other man was dead. We do not know his name because the Germans took his identification title. The Germans took everything valuable in the plane and then started looking for you and your friends. Vasek explained that Mihailovich's orders were to protect the Americans at all costs, which Feldman understood to have real meaning when the cost might include retaliation against the local villagers. He then called over a young soldier who had been standing nearby and introduced him as Miodrag Stefanovich. Miodrag. He will be your bodyguard, Vasek's wife explained. He is one of the best fighters. He will protect you. From that day forward, Stefanovich stayed by Feldman's side day and night, never leaving him unguarded for a moment. The next morning, after a sound sleep on a straw mattress, Feldman awoke to hard pounding rain. When he looked out the door of the little cottage where he had been put, he saw Stefanovich huddled with 9 other soldiers out under a nearby tree, shivering in the downpour. Feldman called his guard over and asked, through hand gestures, since Stefanovich understood no English, why the soldiers had not come inside. Stefanovich mimed the answer. They had been afraid of waking their special guest. Later that morning, the rest of Feldman's crew started arriving in the village, brought in by soldiers a few at a time, and in one case by 2 boys who led a couple of horses on which the flight engineer, Leonard Tax Pritchett, and radio operator Israel Bronx Mayer rode with flowers in their hair and stuck in their uniforms by the villagers they had met earlier. Another crew member abandoned his hideout in the woods where he was following his training by laying low and waiting for rescue. Unable to stand the cold and hunger any longer, he just walked down to the nearest village and was shocked to see Feldman and the rest of his crew there being treated like royalty. Eventually, all of the surviving members of Fellman's crew made it to the village. After an initial celebration, they included rolling around on the ground, wrestling one another, and laughing wildly with each new arrival. The crew soon came to realize who was missing. It was Tom P. Lovett, a nose gunner from Roxbury, Massachusetts. Once they saw he wasn't among them, they remembered that he had delayed bailing out of the plane, staying at his position while the others bailed out, yelling that he wanted to stay just a moment longer to kill another Nazi fighter. Apparently, he never left his post and went down with the plane. The local villagers recovered Lovett's body and had a formal funeral attended by 300 people, including Fellman and his crewmates. The Serbs made a small headstone inscribed with Lovett's name, military number, and hometown. Later, they gave Fellman some photographs of the grave and the funeral ceremony to take back to Lovett's family. Meanwhile, news of the airmen's plight was reaching their relatives back home. All over the country, families were facing the moment they feared as soon as a loved one left to join the service. They answered a doorbell in the midst of cooking a pie, or they crawled out from under a car they were working on when someone called from the driveway, or they went to the window to see what the dogs were barking at. Their hearts skipped and their throats grew dry in an instant as they saw the Western Union delivery boy standing there with a telegram in his hand. Tony Orsini's mother, Angelina Orsini, was in the kitchen on August 3, 1944, when she heard the knock at the door. Unaccustomed to receiving visitors with no notice, she immediately tensed and wondered if anything was amiss. But it couldn't be Tony, she thought. She had talked with him on the phone only 2 weeks earlier when he was in Manchester, New Hampshire, preparing to go overseas. And she knew he had been in Europe for only about a week. She worried about him constantly, but she had not yet started dreading every knock at the door. Looking every bit the part of an Italian immigrant mother in the kitchen, Mrs. Orsini wiped her hands on her apron before heading to her front door. As she opened the door, she saw a young boy in a Western Union hat standing there. He couldn't have been more than 15 years old. She saw his bike leaning against the front steps. The boy stared down at the floor and mumbled, "Telegram for you, ma'am," never making eye contact. He had done this many times before, and he wanted to just hand over the telegram and leave. "Per me, c'est ceci?" she asked, not knowing what the telegram was or why he was handing it to her. The boy thrust the envelope at her, and she instinctively took it from him, freeing the boy to turn quickly and jump on his bike. He pedaled hard and raced away, leaving Orsini's mother standing there with an envelope that said, "Western Union Telegram," and "Mrs. Angelina Orsini, 28 Beacon Street, Jersey City, New Jersey." She looked down at it and suddenly realized what it was. She gasped and put a hand to her mouth, then tore the envelope open. She fumbled with the paper, folded inside, but quickly saw that it was in English. She could not read a word of it, but she knew it was about her dear Anthony. She began to cry as she stared at the telegram, fearing the worst. Then she looked next door and bolted down the front steps toward a neighbor who was an Italian immigrant like herself, but who could read and write English. She went to the side door and pounded hard. When the woman appeared, she saw Orsini's mother standing there in a panic, tears running down her face and clutching the telegram tightly in both hands. "Celto esse a me, prego colto..." I'm not really good at languages. "Esso a me," she cried to the neighbor. "Please read it to me." Startled, the woman had no idea what the distraught woman was talking about. Then she saw that it was a telegram Angelina Orsini was holding. She knew immediately that this would be terrible news. She didn't want to read the telegram. "No, no, non posso," she replied, shaking her head, full of sympathy, but not wanting to be the one to give this poor woman such bad news. "No, I can't." It's not por favor, but it looks like it. "Per favore, prego, devote," Orsini's mother cried. "Something else in Italian. Please, you must. It's about my Anthony." The neighbor couldn't resist the anguished woman's pleas. She took the telegram and slowly read it in Italian as Orsini's mother began to sob into her apron. There's a whole bunch of Italian here. I'm just going to read it in English. The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son, Second Lieutenant Anthony J. Orsini, has been reported missing in action. Her Anthony had been away such a short time, and already he was gone. She prayed that he was still alive, but she knew that this telegram was often followed by another. And that is it tonight with Tea with Tyson. I will post this, and you guys can watch it tomorrow if you so choose. Good night.